Humanity is messy. Wherever we go, we leave trash and debris. Space is no different. Since the very start of the space race, we have been littering the planet and the space around the planet and the moon and other planets with our space junk. In 1977, the Soviets launched a nuclear-powered spy satellite, Cosmos 954. It malfunctioned and fell back to Earth the next year. Its reactors scattered radioactive debris across northwest Canada and polluted Great Slave Lake. Canada spent years cleaning it up and sent the USSR a bill for $6 million Canadian. The Soviets hemmed and hawed and eventually paid half of it. Skylab, the first American space station, is remembered not for anything that was accomplished on board, but for the panic the media whipped up when its orbit decayed and it fell back to Earth in 1979. You'd have thought it was a giant Earth-killing meteor, not a discarded hunk of junk the length of 2 school buses. It broke into non-radioactive chunks as it fell. Pieces of it littered the ground around the Australian town of Esperance. Esperance fined NASA $400 for littering. NASA never paid. But one Esperance teenager earned $10,000 by racing to San Francisco with a Skylab fragment he had found. He won a San Francisco Chronicle contest for being the first person to bring them a piece of the fallen vehicle. Ranchers around the town were still finding pieces of Skylab on their land in the 1990s. Since Sputnik flew in 1957, Earth has become increasingly shrouded by an ever denser fog of man-made objects. Of the 195 nations in the world today, at least 80 have space programs, and many of them are putting satellites in orbit. Today, 11,000 or so active ones are up there, and more are launched every day. But they represent less than 10% of the man-made objects in the cloud. The rest is more than 100 million pieces of junk, from as small as nuts and bolts, flecks of paint, and bits of copper wiring, to whole dead satellites. Vanguard 1 from 1958 is still up there, and the upper stages of old rockets. The tiny objects, or micro debris, are actually the more worrisome because they can't be tracked. The International Space Station, a target the size of a football field, is constantly dodging collisions. There are actual space junkyards here on Earth. Satellites and other small objects burn and break up into mostly harmless fragments on reentry. Larger objects, like space stations, would be far more dangerous if they fell anywhere populated. Looking for the remotest place on the planet, engineers map the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, the area on the planet farthest from any land. It's in the middle of the South Pacific. They called it Point Nemo, a nod to Jules Verne. It is a watery wasteland surrounded by 22 million square kilometers of featureless ocean. The nearest land, the Pitcairn Islands, is more than 1,400 miles away. Which means that if you're standing on the deck of a ship at Point Nemo, the nearest humans are nowhere on the planet, but on the International Space Station when it passes a mere 250 miles above you. But you're unlikely to be on a ship at Point Nemo, since it's far from any shipping lanes. No one goes there. That's the point of Point Nemo. There's no better place on Earth to bring space rubble down in a planned descent and let it crash into the sea, where it will sink to the bottom, which at Point Nemo is about 1,300 feet down. NASA, The Russians, the Japanese, the European Space Agency, and SpaceX have been using Nemo as an underwater space graveyard since the early 1970s. The Russian space station Mir was brought down there in 2001. The Chinese space station Tiangong-1, which failed after 5 years in orbit, was guided to a watery grave at Point Nemo in 2016. When the International Space Station is decommissioned in 2030, it will end up there. Space agencies say there's little worry that all this junk will pollute the Pacific, claiming that fuel and other toxic substances get burned up during reentry. Really? Tell that to the people who live downrange from Baikonur and Plessek's Cosmodrome, the busy Russian spaceports. The people who eke out a threadbare subsistence in poor hamlets downrange from both cosmodromes have long been accustomed to jettison boosters and fuel containers dropping out of the sky around them. They supplement their meager incomes by salvaging and recycling this space junk. They strip gold and titanium from the wreckage to sell on the black market. They turn sections of crashed fuselages into boats called rocketa. The problem is that in handling these materials, they expose themselves to highly toxic and carcinogenic substances, like the rocket fuel UDMH, which stands for unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine. It's also known as devil's venom. According to studies in the 1990s, 9 out of 10 people in certain downrange areas displayed pathologies ranging from liver damage to depression. UDMH has also turned a vast area of the Kazakh steppe into an ecological disaster zone. Earthbound microplastics have been recorded at apparently increasing levels in the waters at Point Nemo. Even the most remote spot on the planet is not unconnected to the rest. It may turn out not to be as safe as predicted either.